So, yeah, I see Maria's put something in the chat already. It's that she actually put or was it just to me? Just to me. Okay, well, everyone can have that. It's, I think it's, Marie put the PD that I gave you all last week. She put it in actual English, which is really helpful. And it hasn't really changed much, but it's legible and readable and all that kind of stuff. Which differs somewhat from the one I gave you, which was basically derived from Jesse's old PD plus a mind map that he made of what his working life is like and what are all the elements of it. And then we inserted those, or I inserted those into the old PD and then reparsed things a little bit. So that's where that all came from, because someone had asked me, well, actually, I think it was Marty had asked me where that came from, and whether I just made it up or something. But no, it's the one that it's like the one that Jesse has worked with, except for the one that Jesse had was cut into more chunks and wasn't really complete, because there were some things that Jesse brought up in our discussions. I think maybe way last fall, Jesse. I'm trying to remember when that was. Time will kind of smush us together. But he made this really nice mind map that kind of showed what all the different kinds of work, what the different tasks are that an extension lead does, and that was really helpful to me. So that's where that comes from, and then you'll see that Maria's put it in English. And then one of the things I did with that was, based on some feedback from Jesse earlier this week, I indicated that the percentages are aspirational targets, and they will vary. The percentages of work, who knows how those will work out? And I think it depends on the people. It depends on the staff for sure, because I happen to think we have a really great staff right now that maybe are less work than some staff we could have. So it could be actually, could have some effect as well. But they shouldn't be considered as set in stone, those percentages. Those are, like anything else we do, targets and aspirations. I think I called them targets in the newer PD. So I really appreciate you all coming, and I see that Chad's already got the recording going. So anyone who can't be here, we easily can catch them up on anything. And actually, I've talked to, I've given some broad strokes to a few, and as many as I got in touch, could get in touch with, sort of naturally. But let me just put up I'll put up this PowerPoint and I'll walk through this thing. Is it still showing the right thing, Marie? Good. Okay, so big white glaring title slide, but basically this is to say this is a proposal, and this proposal for leadership has come through from several months really of reflection and consideration about what would be really great ways to do extension leadership in Minnesota Sea Grant. And Jesse and I have discussed this over time, and I wanted to put right up front, this is not critical of Jesse in any way. This is critical of maybe how we set up this post, but certainly not of Jesse. And I don't want anyone to mistake, that ain't it. This is about, is there a better way to do this than we've done it in the past, and what might that be? Okay, so basically this is a proposal to change the model in a way that would encourage leadership development in extension and the sharing of leadership opportunities. And that's my vision for a change anyway in extension, and I believe that Jesse shares those values, but he can say whether he does or not. I'd really like your feedback, and I realize that these are hard things to think about. They're urgent things to think about. But please share your suggestions for improvement of this model in any way that suits you. So if you feel comfortable giving feedback verbally today, great. If you'd like to write me an email, great. If you'd like us to meet and talk about it, great. I'm delighted. My objective here is to get to a model that is really great, that is going to work really well for us in the future for leading Minnesota Sea Grant. So I just want you to know that this isn't your last opportunity, and especially if you feel uncomfortable making suggestions for improvement or bringing other ideas that you think might be controversial, please just let's get in touch. Let's set up some time to talk. Our objective here is to solve a problem and to create something that's good. So I shared this PD for you because this is my most complicated slide that I have. I shared the program description earlier in the week, and it's a lot of stuff. But the way I looked at it, and these are all really important tasks, that it's first important to think about what the extension leader does, and it may be a lot more than you perceive, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on in background, sort of behind the curtain. But my aspiration, and I think our aspiration would be, because we're interested in having an extension leader who is materially involved in extension programming, that a part of the expectation be a continuation of extension programming. And this comes from my kind of long involvement with department chairs and heads and stuff and presidents of universities. And I think it's important to have a leader of extension who continues to understand and exercise extension techniques and approaches. So that's why I think, and that's over to the right, that we should have an expectation that a leader of extension programming should be involved in extension. Then there are two other parts to it. One is extension program leadership, and this is carrying out the extension vision and strategy, and helping staff through promotion, development, staff management. There will be some direct reports, of which some of you are to Jesse now, and also sort of facilitate the optimization of extension programs, run extension team meetings, liaise with extension needs and projections with leadership. And we'll get around to talking about some of those things, I think, in next weeks, as we think about how do we parse our funding to best serve. And so it's what do we need in the future? What are we going to need? Do we need more people? Do we need technical skills? What do we need? So that's part of it. Coordinate with other programs and networks, and there's a lot of that. This is ultra simplified, and if you look at the PD, you'll kind of see it in more detail, and especially now that it's written in English. And then there's Minnesota Sea Grant program management. The extension leader sits in the leadership group, of course, and that group works. And some of that may seem really mysterious and arcane, and we try not, those of us in that leadership group try not to be. But there's a lot you probably don't want to know, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And this is doing the stuff that facilitates the overall program management. How does it run? How does it work? We work on budgeting, strategic planning, omnibus planning, the famous and disparaged RIPPER, etc. There are things that get done that someone in leadership has to do. We also work in program evaluation, site review participation, and there's feedback, giving feedback on reports, reviews, plans to the National Sea Grant Office, and participating in advisory board meetings and a bunch of other things. But it basically, I divided into three parts. It could be subdivided more, I suppose, but it just seemed like I was slicing and dicing. And but they're kind of three big bins. And one is lead the extension program, another is help to lead the Sea Grant program, and another one is run some extension program and keep your chops up, basically, a musical term, but keep keep understanding and exercising extension. So those percentages, as I said, are aspirational, and it will be highly dependent on individual skills and attributes, and will vary over time period and experience. I mean, early on and taking on a leadership position, there is likely to be less time for extension, and hopefully there'll be more over time. So this is just what the extension leader does, and there's a lot. And you probably didn't have, you don't see it all because some of it's hidden behind the curtain, but then there it is. Okay, so this is a current model. That's kind of how we did this. And in the past is that we have a pool of extension educators, and then one of the extension educators was then determined as extension leader. And the way it worked out, and this is a lot, not due to intent, but due to HR intervention, that position is converted to an administrative post. So it wasn't, the position that Jesse occupies now is an administrative job. It has a different job code than the 9621 through 23 that the extension educators occupy. And that means that a bunch of things. One is there's no real possibility for graceful transition and rotation of leadership responsibilities across the program, and going back to one's extension life would require a complicated reclassification process. And so I think there are lots of reasons. There are problems that are caused, I think, by this kind of approach, in that one is putting someone in that position for the long term, and in order to change leadership in any way, or for the relief of the leader, or for renewal of ideas or any other reason, it would take a very large upheaval. One would have to basically reclassify the post, and I don't think that's terribly helpful as a position. That, at least that's my opinion, and others I think have. My opinion. Okay, so there's some problems with the current model, and that is that it limits leadership contributions and leadership development across extension educators. That is, one person is indicated as extension leader, and they are leader over the long term. It makes extension leadership opportunities contingent on departure of an extension leader, or some other complex process of changing the designation of the post. And it kind of means that there's a sort of up equals out for extension educators and leaders, because if there's someone in the leadership position and they are unwilling to change that from that position, if you are seeking leadership, you kind of have to leave the program and go to some other program, which I don't think is helpful for the development of the program. And also for the extension leader, it's really hard to get. You don't like in a department, you can go back to being a full professor, let's say, and develop a big program, and that's very hard with the way this is set up. It also removes extension lead from extension role, and well, it just means stepping down is not an option without changing classification, but I've said that a couple of times. It also could make leadership prone to administrative burnout, that there's no end in sight, and no possibility for refreshing, and it could also serve to distance the extension leader from their extension role. So I think these are some problems to solve, but I think from my way of thinking, I would like us, I mean, I don't look at this as much from the these are problems point of view as I do from the here are opportunities point of view, which is we have the chance to build leadership within our ranks and get a deeper bench in extension leadership. And that's what I'd like our leadership model to do. And of course, because I come out of this academic background, I have this model in mind, and that's the department chair model. And I think it's much more inclusive and flexible. The chair in a department, and most of you, all of you have been through some kind of academic department, I suspect, but the chair usually isn't designated as a chair forever. It happens, but the chair is recruited normally from the faculty, or sometimes as a new faculty member at an upper level of rank, and they're recruited from the faculty for a specific term. It is pretty rare in my experience that anyone has an indeterminate term. It's usually, for department chairs, something like 4 years. The chair is given an increase in compensation and an appointment that gives them temporary administrative designation, but they retain their faculty status. And they're also usually given some other assistance to help them to sustain their active role in faculty activities. And in a department chair situation, it's often because you're pulling somebody out of teaching and research. The other assistance is usually something like a postdoctoral fellow to keep the program running, or some teaching relief instructors hired to help with the teaching. Sometimes it's a lab tech or technical skill, technical ability coming into their lab to keep things running or run things better, and so on. So that's really usually is via discussions between a candidate and the dean in the case of a department chair, but in our case it would be discussions with the director about what would make it possible. And the internal process is by application, discussion, and agreement. External recruitment as a faculty is done as a faculty hire if there is no mutually agreeable internal candidate. Well, and one can afford it, which we can in our case if we need to. So there are two processes, and I'll look at the process with you in just a second. But basically what happens is an open call in a department chair position goes out to the faculty before the end of each term of appointment, allowing others to indicate their interest in contributing to leadership and express their interest and their ideas about leadership and how they would manage a leadership position. And then, as I say, if there aren't any mutual agreeable arrangements within the department, then the call usually will go outside. So this is a model that basically I think is a really good one. It stood the test of time. It allows all kinds of flexibility, both for the leader and for the and for the group that they're leading. So the proposed model that I have put forward, and Jesse and I have talked about, and I've also talked about this model with Amy Heitapelta, who's the executive vice chancellor, and she feels pretty supportive too. And HR has given me no indication we can't do this, and has given me leave to start talking about it. Is that the proposed model would be that if one is an extension educator, the call goes out to the extension educators, and the idea is we would rotate an extension educator for a term appointment into extension leadership, in which they would keep the same job code, but would have a thing called a term appointment letter that would say, here's for this period of time, you will keep your job code, and you will have a salary bump and an administrative designation that matches your term. And I put in here one or more 3 to 4 year terms. And so my experience is, well, 2 years is way too short, 5 years is way too long, and so 3 or 4 years seems, if it's 1 year, for example, you just learn it and then you're done. Or even if it's 2 years, you just learn what you're doing and then you're done. And I think that's too short. Most terms for department chairs are 4 years that I know of. There's some that are 5. And then another thing we should discuss is, what's our process after that term, or when that term is drawing to a close. Do we entertain the possibility of renewal? How many renewals, etc.? Do we do a similar call out to the staff saying, hey, person Y's, or person X's term is drawing to a close. Is there anyone else interested in putting themselves forward for extension lead and so on? Those are details that we probably need to work out. But this is the overall model, that it would be flexible and rotate members of our extension staff into leadership for a term, with the possibility of renewal, but also the possibility of returning to one's extension role. So any questions? I can stop and take questions if there are any. Sorry, I should have said that to start with.
John, where you say 1 or more 3 to 4 year terms, is that because you're thinking that involved in this could be like some sort of an assistant? I think you had that on a previous slide.
Well, yeah, it could be. Well, there are a couple levels of assistance. A model that I've seen in various department chair appointments has been that other members of the unit who are interested in taking on leadership roles can have assistant or associate lead positions with particular dossiers. So that's kind of one way to involve colleagues and maybe lighten the load, and also build a leadership strength faster. I think, since I consider all of you to be excellent extension educators, and there's nothing you do that I wouldn't want to stop what you're doing. We'd have to try and figure out how to continue the sort of thing that's actually going on, that's actually being done. And that would probably take us, sorry, Peter, but we're gonna need to spend some money to do that. And there are several different models we could take. And I think working out those details would be premature. This would be in discussion. I think we'd say, Kelsey, what does it take to get you to do this? What would you need? And then you tell me, and I say, I can't afford that. No. Then do we need to hire somebody to come in and take up this role? Do we need to, what do we need to do? I think that's it. There are too many ways that could morph. And I've really almost never seen a department chair model that's always the same. It's what do you need, and how do we help, and how do we sustain our excellence while recognizing the reality that we need strong leadership and extension. Does that help, Kelsey?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure. Anything else before I move ahead to a couple other slides? I don't have a whole lot more. One can ask, what happens to department chairs post post leadership appointment or post chair appointment. Some of them love it and really, really love it and want to do only that. And they go and seek administrative jobs. You've probably seen this happen, like department chairs and become deans and things like that. And in some cases, people are okay with it. They might take multiple terms, eventually decline reappointment, and return to their previous duties. And I would say that is probably the main outcome, is that one does fulfills the responsibility for leadership for the group, and then maybe returns back to what you were doing before. And then there are those who do it as a duty and they decline any reappointment, then they return to their previous duties, and it's all possible. So I think everybody, I mean, there should be no rigid model for what happens. And I think a lot has to do with experience and things that one experiences and so on. But also, even if someone loves it and then seeks an administrative job elsewhere, an ongoing administrative job, we've done our duty in terms of workforce development and professional development. It's part of, I feel that when we hire somebody in Minnesota Sea Grant, we should hire them to promote them and advance them professionally to the best and quickest degree we can. So, and if eventually it means somebody leaves, that's okay. They're going on to something that they've received good experience in our program with. So lots of different outcomes happen from department chair posts, and I would expect, over the long term, we might see diverse reactions to doing it. There's a general feeling in faculty members that eventually they will have the responsibility to take up a role as a leader in the department because someone else did it for them, and sometimes we take it, you take it on as a responsibility. But and sometimes one really likes it, and sometimes one is really keen to get back to what they were doing before. So lots of outcomes. Okay, so I would see, this is my proposal in seeking new extension leadership. And this is just kind of a schematic of what I've already said. It's in parallel with a department chair post. Is that we'd start with a call for internal candidates and say, basically, anybody interested in doing this, if you are, then send me a letter of interest with information on your vision for leadership of extension, and do it by a particular date. And then we have discussions and negotiations of conditions, if there are any candidates, and eventually move toward a term appointment. And in some cases, we might foresee that there would be not much interest or not enough interest, or no candidates with immediate ability and skill that want to take it on. And in that case, we're in the position where we can turn to defining of an extension post with an extension lead appointment for an external search. We form a search committee. We undertake a hiring process. That search committee makes recommendations to the director in the usual way we do for posts. And then there's a negotiation of conditions and approval of the hire, and that would go on with the director and the executive vice chancellor. So, because it's a new external hire. But I'd like to hasten to add to this that in my proposed vision, it would be an external hire of an extension educator with a term appointment as extension lead, because it's parallel with our internal process. Any questions on this proposal? I would see that first phase proceeding pretty rapidly. And I don't know what a reasonable length of time to draw one's thoughts together about what you would propose. And I think a little later somewhere I've got another slide that says something about what optimally I'd like to see in a letter of intent or a letter of interest. If I don't, I can define it pretty easily. Questions? Anyone? Thoughts? Okay. Oh, okay. This is where I did the rotation process. I did this a couple of days ago, so I kind of forgot about it. So internal application goes to the director. The statement of vision for extension for the next 3 to 4 years should be included in that, including a statement of needs to permit leadership. That will really help. You need a resume, of course, although I have everybody's resume in the group, I think, by now. Names of some internal referees and external referees with knowledge of leadership, your leadership experience and potential. And so I think the one should be an associate extension professor or be able to be promoted or go up for promotion within 24 months. And this is really only a safety valve to make sure that we don't disadvantage someone's career who's relatively new and doesn't have a dossier yet together that would allow them to be promoted. The salary increase would be set by human resources, and I would not have any control over that because it has to be parallel with other sorts of leadership positions. It's not insignificant, but my guess is it would not be gigantic. And I don't even know what I mean by that, but that'd be something we'd have to find out from HR, and we're still kind of waiting for the info. And Peter, I don't know if we got a timeline on that or not, but they were working on what would be in a letter of appointment. Then we discuss other conditions with me, and we figure it out whether we can make it work. And then and the negotiations of other conditions and decisions is with me and the EVCAA. They've got to approve anything we do, any change like this we do. And then if our internal process doesn't pan out, unsuccessful sounds bad, but I mean, it may be successful for us or unsuccessful, regardless of the turnout. But it would lead to an external search, but it's kind of the normal search process with a stipulated leadership term. So here's my summary of this proposal I make to you, and on which I'd really like your thoughts about improvement or changes. And this follows basically the department chair model. It's really familiar in universities, and I would say that's probably one of the reasons we have a chance to do it this way, because they understand, university administrations understand how department chair rotations work. It's a sharing of leadership responsibilities that I think will lead to increased leadership development, which I think is important for any of you who are interested. It rotates leadership among colleagues. It offers defined support for leadership and allows leadership while sustaining extension programs. And as I said at the beginning, I'd really be grateful if you'd be willing to share your thoughts now via email, one-on-one with me, and any smoke signals or any other way you see reasonable to talk to me about this. I feel really enthusiastic about this, but logic could quell my enthusiasm. So, but I think it's an approach that would lead to strong professional development and leadership development within our ranks, and I'd like to offer that opportunity as broadly as we possibly can. So, thanks, and love to have any feedback. I see Tiff has got something. Go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other better.
One thing I'm thinking about is just with the current timing of the coupling of strategic planning and that being a leader's first year, and thinking maybe in this year you just can't change it, but as we move forward with timelines, is there a way to decouple that very first year of your role as leader also being strategic planning year? Because that seems perhaps a bit intense as you're also trying to learn the leadership role. That's the only thing I think about. Just that seems like a huge leap.
I'll offer a chance for anyone else who wants to respond to that. But Jesse and I, as we talk about his departure, Jesse's planning out how far we can get in strategic planning before he leaves, and that is very generous of him and very helpful. We should be pretty far along in that process by midsummer. Yes, it's a really intense year. You know, nothing would ever fall in a good year. You know, it's always tough timing, but and you know, and then we will be through peer by then, which is helpful. And then strategic plan needs to be finalized. And Jesse, you can correct me. My thought was we're having a preliminary strategic plan in late July, early August, I think is where we are. Is that correct, Jesse? Yeah, thank you.
Draft is due to our program officer by August 8th. Our plan is to have it done by mid-July.
So we should be fairly far along in the preliminary, with the preliminary strategic plan. I think, and Jesse and I talking about this transition and recruitment of extension leadership, you know, I think it is going to be an intense first year. You know, and you know, we'll need to talk about that. You know, how do we make that happen best? And you know, we are all the way through annual assessments, which is great. And virtually everyone who's on staff will have had experience with that by the time, except for we're not doing it the same way. I've told you this, we're not going to do it the same way. We'll do it better. We'll do it easier. But that we'll figure out. So annual assessments aren't, you know, coming up immediately. There is Sea Grant Week coming up in the fall in September, right, which is a pretty good opportunity for a new extension leader to meet with others and so on. So there's some advantages and some disadvantages, Tiffany, but I do think it'll be intense. I think you're right, no doubt. Jesse.
I would maybe just add to that. Yeah, there's never a good time, but I think it'd be better to do this during a strategic planning time than either an omnibus writing time or at a site review time. I think both of those processes, it's much better to have a really strong understanding of what's going on in the program than it is to, you can do a strategic plan without knowing necessarily a whole lot about what's already happened, because you're really looking at what should happen, not necessarily what is happening. Obviously they're related, but it'd be a lot harder to write an omnibus. It'd be a lot harder to plan for a site review if you didn't have a really good feeling for what everybody else has been doing.
Right.
So from that standpoint, I would say that if you got to pick a time frame to make a change, the strategic plan time is maybe easier.
Yeah, and well, there's another advantage, Jesse, and then Marty's got her hand up. But the other advantage is we have some latitude in our budget right now, and we get to plan our budget right now. So if the new extension lead has other ideas about how we want to do things, or if we need to mobilize some of our budget in order to enable that extension lead to do the work that they have ahead, we can do that, because, you know, we've got a bit of a a funding opening, and we're about to define how our budget is going to look in fall. And so I think it also is an opportunity for the new extension lead to have some say on more say on how that program might develop than if we started mid, after the strategic plan was in. So I think it's pretty good from that standpoint. Marty.
What happens with extension educators who have a dual or mixed appointment?
Oh, between two institutes, like Maggie, for example, or
Yeah.
KIF, right? Well, we'd have to figure that out, right? I mean, if it could be that we would need to then buy out part of that appointment from the other institution. I'm not sure. I don't know the answer, but my guess is that's part of what we need to do in order to make it happen. And we, I mean, should it be with the Water Resources Center, then, I need to talk with Joel and Jeff and say, I don't know. We have to figure out how to do that without violating confidentiality and a bunch of stuff. I'm unsure. Yes, Peter, that is correct. We would ask HR for advice. Precisely. Thank you. I should just defer any of these questions to Peter. He sees it clearly. We would. But I don't think it's impossible. What I was trying to telegraph was, I don't think it's impossible. It can be probably worked out, but we do it right. We follow policy and we do it carefully. Kelsey, go ahead.
So I just want to make sure that I am understanding your vision for this position or appointment. Okay, so like for me, I'm reporting to the extension leader, so that would mean like every 4 years I would have a different person that I would be reporting to, correct?
If the extension lead did not continue,
right?
And
Yeah.
But you never could, it's the same as in a department, right? Because you never know if your department chair is going to be the same department chair, but yes, you're right. Hopefully, because we have, I think, a fairly clear promotion document, and we're trying to keep promotion parallel with annual assessment more and more, do this a little more clearly. The criteria are clearly spelled out. It shouldn't cause any serious alarm or any impediment to the promotion process. I do think we have to talk about our promotion guidance and extension, because there's some pieces in there that I think we need to fix to make them more flexible. Things like what resets the promotion clock is now up to the discretion of somebody, and I think it should be automatic, for example, in certain cases. So, but anyway, that's another story. But because of that parallelism between annual assessment, the clarity of our promotion guidance, and the fact that it may not be a new person to report to every 4 years or 3 years or whatever it might be, it shouldn't cause a serious problem. It's no different than you'd encounter in any department, really. There's no higher risk. Does that help at all? I mean, what I've said is, yes, you're right. And yes, you would probably report to someone different with some unpredictable frequency. And I don't know what that would be. I just read the chat and I see my audio was cutting out at some point, and I hope I didn't bury a lot of stuff that you guys wanted to hear. If there's anything that we might have missed, I can review it.
So John, I have a question for you, and apologies, I put that in there, but I think it was me, not you, that was having issues. When you talked about associate and assistants to the extension leader, is your vision at this time that once the extension leader was selected by whatever process we eventually come to use, it would be a conversation among that person and the leadership team as to what, if any, associate or assistants we were looking for in topical areas of expertise, as you mentioned? So the question is, does a new extension leader get to pick their associate and assistant leaders in isolation, or is your expectation that that would be a conversation among the new extension leader and leadership?
I think almost all of these things end up being a leadership conversation, but it would not be a pick, it would be an invitation, I think. And it would be a mutual agreement between a person who would like leadership experience, who is part of staff, and whoever's extension leader. I don't think we're drafting anyone. I think that would be foolish.
And my question was not to draft, more just who got to be part of that conversation. So your clarification duly noted.
Yeah, I really think it would, many things become a discussion with leadership, I guess, and that would seem appropriate to me, especially in the case that we might be hiring someone new from outside. That extension leader may want some input on the viability of the program. I would think. I would see the extension leader really wanting the input from colleagues. I think that give and take is important. Don.
So John, if I understand what you're saying correctly, whoever ends up as the new extension leader, there's going to need to be some backfilling into that position, because I don't think anybody that I'm looking at on this screen has 70% time that they can just, roll into administrative work. So my question would be then, say we bring somebody on to help backfill, which won't happen immediately. I mean, there's always a learning curve. What happens to that person then 3 years, 4 years down the road if that extension leader changes? Are they part of Sea Grant or are they out the door?
I mean, of course, it would depend on the nature of the appointment and the nature of the need. So I don't think I can give you a blanket response, but I believe, since there's a fixed, I mean, I'm just giving my initial feelings about this, Don. I really don't know. Again, I think I would ask HR what to do, what the best way to fill might be. There are lots of different ways, and each different way would depend on what the actual needs are. We have got it, and this is a different conversation too, and I shouldn't, well, I'll bring it up anyway. We need to make some decisions about how we want to spend our full-time equivalents that we have, and coming through, it's a very good time for this because we're coming through strategic planning. We've got a lot of feedback on what the unsatisfied needs might be, or the most intense needs might be from our stakeholders, and we can define some of those positions. But I guess my immediate vision of how we would fill, we would try to do it in a way that would be as flexible as possible, to be able to allow the extension educator who's taken on the leadership post to get back to their extension program. So it doesn't feel like a permanent hire. I'd really want to think about that a lot more, and I think it would be, it's an excellent question, but we've got a lot of different ways to solve the problem, solve the problem, to do the backfill. And in some, usually in departments, I can fall back on that. Usually in departments, these would be term appointments of some kind. You know, there would be graduate student posts and postdocs and technical assistants and so on. It may be different in our world, and I think I need to give it just a little bit more thought. But thanks for that ping. It's important. I have Amy's hand up and then Marie, I think.
So I just have a quick question. In my very small experience, Sea Grant is a little bit more hierarchical and cohesive than an academic department. And I just wondered if there are other programs that use this model, or do they typically have use the previous model, or how well it works with other programs since everybody else is also based at a university?
Yeah, I've talked to other Sea Grant directors who use similar approaches, but many programs are bigger than we are. And so it would maybe not be very feasible if you have 15 extension educators. It would take on different dimensions, I think. But I have talked to other Sea Grant directors, and they use all kinds of different models for this. Some of the big programs that we know about tend to have sort of permanent administrators leading extension. And I'm thinking of Wisconsin and Oregon, for example, but some of the others are far more flexible in this regard.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, I could do a poll, but Sea Grant directors hate polls. But just in conversation, I've run very schematic diagrams, verbal diagrams of this past people, and they've said it's somewhat similar to what they do. But it's and also we have a different HR limitation, and what they did was, if we indicated that Jesse was doing X amount of administration, they pretty much insisted on an administrative appointment, and not all universities would probably do that. So building in the flexibility up front, I think, is very important with our particular HR environment, making sure that we stay flexible. I think Marie was next. And
to Don's question, part of the conversation was that we might treat those folks in the same way that a postdoc would be taken on. So not a permanent position, time limited. And as John said, if the system that we employ changes over time, their position might change should we and they want to. But I think that riffing on the department chair model, the postdoc model would, at least as my understanding from what John has been talking about, would be the way we'd approach some of those things.
Yeah, we already have some parallels for defined term appointments, and we know how to do that. And since we wouldn't want to lock, I mean, part of the idea of this is flexibility, right? And we don't want to lock a department chair, an extension lead into automatically accepting a long enough appointment that a permanent replacement would be necessary. There are lots of ways of being flexible, but thanks for that, Marie. Yeah, and thanks, Jesse, for your comment about so many, Georgia, for example, many of their extension educators are part of Marine Extension and not Sea Grant. So, and this is not used at the University of Minnesota main campus, this approach. There are career administrators in running extension, but there are many, many, many extension educators, and it's a very different size of organization.
Although within U of M Extension, they have had in the past, at least, I think this maybe was under whatever previous formulation of their extension program before regional centers, they would have folks that would step up to lead a program area with an extension for some period of time, and then go back to their extension role, or on up to some other administrative thing. I can think of several folks over time that have done both of those with an extension.
I think Mike Schmidt might have been one who stepped upward from an extension role into a ongoing administrative post. But there are many more layers. I mean, those are big organizations. But thank you for that. Actually, HR was looking around for, does anyone else at University of Minnesota do this? That always makes it easier for them if they know how it was done. Any other things spring to mind immediately? This conversation is nowhere near over. But if there's anything on your minds now, we have a minute or two left. But if not, as I said, get back to me in any way you find appropriate. Critiques, suggestions, improvements. I'm happy to talk about any of this. This is a process that I want to work for building strong professional development in our program, and making it possible to refresh leadership and give more diverse experiences to our extension education group. And happy to take any input and any thoughts. Clearly, there's a somewhat of an urgency here. We are pressing the upper administration for sort of final go-ahead. But I want to be able to integrate suggestions you've got into the final process. Marty, you look puzzled. Was there something?
That was pretty good. I was gonna type it because well, we're getting close on time. I guess I'll just ask it instead. In the department chair model that you refer to as sort of a model for this, does supervision also rotate with the department chair? So sometimes the department chair is supervising and responsible for performance evaluation of their colleagues, and then other times another person is?
Almost always the department chair is responsible.
Okay.
Yeah, and also the department chair is responsible, as this position would be, for the promotion process, which is highly arduous in an academic department because it's a promotion and tenure process that it's heavy duty stuff, but yes, they are. I mean, I annually reported to my department chair. We'd have, in the latter years, I would say there was a bottle of wine involved, but I mean, earlier on it was the same kind of annual review that one has. You talk it over, and then there's merit kinds of ratings stuff and things like that. Anything else?
John, yeah, just what you're thinking about, like, follow-up. Are you planning on having like a part 2 to this conversation? And then I think wrapped up in this, but maybe not wrapped up in this, but to me it is like the FTEs that you mentioned. So that would be, Jesse's programming and Doug's programming and what, Dee's position. And that, are you thinking a separate conversation for that at some point?
Yeah. I do, and that's I do think that's a different conversation. It's related, of course, because we can only spend so much, and we have to, as Peter is wont to say, if you spend it on this, you don't spend it on that. And but I do think in the conversation I would see us having that I think is really urgent, and it's one that I brought up with a few of you already just in our one-on-ones, is we can decide, we have the opportunity to decide how we want to spend our funds. We can say, for example, I mean, actually right now, Peter ran the numbers on it. We have more extension educators than we've had since 2016. I think I've got that right. Pull it out of an email that you sent me. We can make a decision whether we want to invest in more extension educators, or do we want to build technical skills and abilities in the program that allow each one of you to do what you do better, more efficiently, easier, without spending your time on technical things, for example, that you may feel less qualified to do, or we can do some of each. And I think that is a strategic conversation that we need to have. I know you've talked about this in the extension group to some degree, and Jesse is going to bring a summary of that to the leadership group. We have to be looking out into the future and saying, what is it we're going to need in terms of technical and professional skills? Do we need enough of that that's where we want to spend a little more? It's a separate but related conversation, Kelsey, and I appreciate your bringing it up. You know, it's like Caesar said, sometimes in a battle, everything must be done at once. And I should say that in Latin, but it would make no sense to anyone, including me. I'd get it wrong. But he was being attacked by 3 armies. And so sometimes everything must be done at once. And it's true in this case, too. We must do everything at once. And each decision you make relies on another. But I do want people to be thinking, all of us, not just extension, about how we might want to, what's our optimal way of spending funding. Clearly, we're going to need some to build leadership, right? Because whoever amongst you might want to take on leadership, we will need to make it possible for you to do the good work you do. So there's going to be a cost there. If we recruit externally, that's going to take an FTE. So each one of these decisions depends on others, but I think in general, as a philosophical discussion, it's important for us to project enough what we want to do into the future that we can say, we're going to need tons more of this, less of that, lots of this. Here's something we're not sure about, but maybe we can contract it. And I know Marie's already thinking, concerning the D's post, how do we best get the technical abilities that we really are going to need. So important question. I appreciate it. Thank you, Kelsey.
John,
go
to
ahead.
Kelsey's question, I think the other category of people that you've placed into that bucket were researchers. So in addition to looking at whether we wanted to buy, not a very nice word maybe, extension people or other types of staff folks, I think you had also mentioned whether we want to consider researchers in that group as well.
I posed it as a question. And in speaking with Cole today and with Marty, education is one of the areas where Sea Grant programs feel that they underinvest. We're the 3-legged stool that has 12 legs or so. It's but yeah, research. I mean, you look back in time, and Sea Grant supported a lot of researchers, and yes, they fed the extension program directly. I pose it as a question, Marie, more than it wasn't a conclusion, but it was and here's another thing that we do. that we could make decisions about. We're over time. Anyone have anything further? I will thank you with full gratitude for your time today, and I'm really looking forward to any improvements you have to suggest. Oh, I was asked the question, what's kind of going on? What's the timeline? You know, I need to wait for approval from HR and the Executive Vice Chancellor for academic of whatever, AA. And when they say okay, then if there are modifications, substantial modifications to the process that I need to get back to you. I mean, if I'm getting a groundswell of resistance or something, I will listen carefully and try and decide which way to turn. I think probably, and if that doesn't happen, then what I would be doing is, in a way, letting you know by putting out a call, and that call would be to the extension personnel for asking whether there's anyone interested in taking on this post. And at that time, I probably would have, you know, so I have a written document that I'm working on that would spell out, like my PowerPoint did, what a process might be. And but like I say, we've opened this conversation, and I'd really like to have any input you've got, and that you'd like to bring me in. We'll see if there are needs for modification. And if so, if it's substantial, I have to take it back to the administration, and we'll have to see what they say. But so far, I think we're on a pretty good road, unless it's just there are points that come up that make it appear to be not viable.
So John, one clarifying question, again, riffing on what Kelsey asked you. If this is part one conversation, what I heard you say, clarify, correct me if I got this wrong, is that if you get the go ahead, the next time we're going to talk about this in this sort of form will be when you issue a proposal.
It could be that way. I mean, if there aren't, what I was trying to say was that I'm waiting for input. I'd like to have input from you all in the next week, if I could. That way I know whether there are substantial modifications to this proposal that need to be considered. But if there aren't, then I would say probably the next step, since I've tried to explain it as clearly as possible, next step might be that we say we've got approval. I didn't have much in the way of input or concerns, or I had these concerns. Here's how I modified the process. And I'd like to get it moving if we can, because I don't want us to, I don't want you all, especially in extension, to feel that you don't have leadership and that you are not getting backing. So I'd like to fill extension leadership with excellence and as rapidly as we can. So if you could get me feedback within a week, that would be great. If there are, and I'll take it anyway. You know, if you want to talk on the phone, I hate the phone, but I can do the phone, or we can set up a Zoom and talk one-on-one, or just let me know what you'd like to do, because you're going to have thoughts about this after you leave this meeting, and turn them over in your mind and get back to me. I'm counting on you. So, but within a week it'd be nice, because we got to move it along, because if we're doing an external search, for example, well, then in that case, and I didn't treat that, there's the opportunity to name an interim chair if there's a gap, but that's really hard for the interim chair if there, but that we'd have to talk about later. Let's see where we get with the process. that can be done actually pretty easily, except for not easily for the person doing it. So